smoked maple pumpkin pie. I've heard of people making their pumpkin pie in a smoker, but I'd yet to actually try it. There just seems something so autumn about making a pumpkin pie completely from scratch, from fresh pumpkins, and baking it in an offset smoker, infusing the sweet and spicy tastes of a pumpkin pie with a little bit of smokiness. So I was 100% on board to try it for myself. And in this video, that's exactly what we're gonna do. We're gonna be making our own pumpkin puree from scratch, from a beautiful pie pumpkin, roasting them in the smoker. And of course, we need to make a pie crust. And I think a graham cracker crust fits perfectly with this recipe. So we're gonna be making that from scratch and baking it in the smoker. Make our pumpkin custard, load up that pie crust, and bake the whole thing again in the smoker. And finally, since every other part of this thing is 100% scratch made, we're gonna make some whipped cream from scratch too. There's a few steps to go through, none of which are especially complicated, and the whole thing comes together rather easily. So let's get right into it and start making this smoked pumpkin pie. Here's the pie pumpkin I'm going to be using today, and the first thing I need to do is get it opened up and cleaned out. So I'll cut around the top so I can remove the cap and the stem, and then chop the whole thing in half right down the middle. Then with a spoon and a little elbow grease, I'll just scoop and clean out all the seeds and membrane in there. The easiest and in my opinion best way to turn a pumpkin into puree is to first roast it. So I'll lay both pumpkin halves face down on a parchment lined baking sheet, and I'll roast them at about 425 degrees for about 1 hour. And as advertised, I'll be doing everything in the offset smoker. So I'll get some lump charcoal going and start heating up the smoker. And of course, I'll be throwing in some hardwood chunks in there as well. When the smoker is up to temp, in goes my pumpkin halves. And about an hour later, they're looking very nice and smelling terrific. After letting the pumpkin sit for a little while to cool enough that I can actually handle it, I'll start scooping out all that flesh, leaving the skin behind. The pumpkin flesh is pretty soft at this point and will come away from the skin with little effort. So I'll just scoop and scrape and peel until I've got a beautiful pile of pumpkin mush. And I'm sure you noticed that all that pumpkin mush went straight into the food processor, because that is our very next step. I'm just going to blitz it all as much as necessary until it's all completely pureed. I'll stop a couple times to scrape down the sides and just keep blending. And once it's as smooth as I can possibly get it, we're ready to move on. Now to turn that pumpkin puree into the custard pie filling. After transferring it all to a big bowl, I'm adding the following: 1 teaspoon vanilla extract, 1/2 teaspoon kosher salt, 2 teaspoons ground cinnamon, 1 teaspoon ground nutmeg, 1 teaspoon ground cloves, 1 teaspoon ground ginger, 1 cup heavy cream, 1/4 cup maple syrup, 3 beaten eggs, and 1/4 cup of sugar. Now I'll whisk everything together very thoroughly until I've got a perfectly consistent and incorporated mixture. And while I'm doing that, a quick note. Many, if not most, pumpkin pie recipes these days call for using condensed milk, and that's how I used to do it. But I came across a very old recipe sometime back that called for heavy cream, and I gave it a try. Since then, I've become a big fan of using heavy cream instead of condensed milk, and it works very well. But you do have to adjust the sugar content. Condensed milk is usually sweetened, which means you need to add some additional sugar if using heavy cream instead. Anyway, I'll stick this whole bowl of pie filling into the refrigerator for a while until I'm ready for it. Because the next thing we have to do is make our pie crust. And while I love a traditional pie crust just fine, I wanted to do something a little different today. So I'm making a graham cracker crust, and it's really quite simple to do. First, I'll turn a whole bunch of graham crackers into crumbs using the food processor. I used 2/3 of a box of graham crackers for this, and that was more than enough for what I ended up needing. I'll measure out 1 2/3 cups of those crumbs into a separate bowl. And before I do anything else, I'll get 6½ tablespoons of butter melting in a small saucepan. Then to the cracker crumbs, I'll add 1/3 cup of white sugar and 1/2 teaspoon of salt. Give it all a quick stir, and finally, all that melted butter. Stir it all together very thoroughly until completely incorporated, and now we're ready to form this stuff into our crust. So I'm breaking out my cast iron pie pan, which is going to be perfect for putting in the smoker. And I'm pouring in that graham cracker mixture, and I'll start using my hands to form that crumb mixture to the shape of the pan, taking care to press it into the bottom and up the sides of the pan. Then I'll come back through with the help of a flat-bottomed measuring cup and a spoon to really press it all down quite firmly. As long as you press it all down good and firm, it's going to stay in place. And the final step to making this crust is to bake it for about 8 minutes at 350 degrees. And of course, I'll be doing that in the smoker. After 8 minutes, it's coming back out, and I'll just let it cool for a few minutes before moving on. And finally, we can assemble this pie. I'll just start ladling that pie filling into the crust. I'll fill it almost all the way to the top, leaving maybe about ½ an inch of crust visible. Now this pie is going back into the smoker, heated to 325 degrees. I'll let it bake until the internal temperature at the center of the pie is 175 degrees Fahrenheit. For this particular pie, in this particular smoker, in this particular pan, that took close to 2 hours. Depending on your pan size, your smoker, and your fire management skills, it may take less or more time to bake. So definitely keep an eye on it and cook it to that 175 degree internal temperature. Once the center is reading 175 degrees, the pie is coming out. I'll set it on the counter so it can cool completely to room temperature, after which I'll put it into the fridge for another few hours until completely chilled. Okay, it's several hours later and I'm about to dig into this thing. But first, what kind of monster would serve pumpkin pie without some whipped cream? So we're making up a batch from scratch, and it's super easy. Into my mixer bowl goes 1 cup of heavy cream, followed by 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract and 4 tablespoons of sugar. Using the whisk attachment, I'll mix it all on medium speed for about 5 minutes until it, well, looks like whipped cream. Finally, it's time to try a slice. Removing that first wedge of pie is always a little nerve-wracking because I'm trying so hard not to mutilate or mangle it. Especially when making a video like this, the last thing I want to do is totally destroy this beautiful pie right here at the finish line. And I'd call that mostly successful. It's pretty much triangular shaped, and I can clean up some of this business left in the pan so it looks pretty for the thumbnail. Alright, let's finish this thing off. A spoonful of that fluffy, amazing whipped cream. Well, maybe 2 spoonfuls. And a sprinkling of some of those leftover graham cracker crumbs. Don't mind if I do. Not that I'm biased on the matter, but that right there is an awfully nice looking slice of pumpkin pie. Now to finally take a bite. That's definitely unlike any pumpkin pie I've ever tasted before. All the flavors are there that you'd expect them to be. The cinnamon, the nutmeg, the cloves, the ginger, the little bit of sweet, the little bit of maple, a beautiful creamy custard that's just the right consistency, and that graham cracker crust came out perfectly. Hard to complain about some good old whipped cream, especially the homemade kind. And as far as the smokiness, it's definitely present. I can smell it on the pie, and I can definitely taste it. It's a little unusual, I'll admit, but not overwhelming at all, and generally rather pleasant. Will I now go out of my way to smoke every pumpkin pie that I make? Probably not. I think that I could live with it either way, honestly. But if you're looking to try something a little bit different, or you're just a huge fan of smoky flavors and things, then this is a pretty good one to try. And if you want to try the exact recipe that I made here today, I'll put a link in the video description below to the exact recipe for everything. And be sure to like and subscribe and stay up to date with all our latest stuff, including future baking and smoking videos. And consider supporting us on Patreon at patreon.com/GreatLakesCountry. Thanks for watching and for all your continued support. And until next time, I'm John, and this is Great Lakes Country.